One of the biggest problems that I hear from podcast hosts is, Courtney, I am pouring so much value into these episodes and nobody is asking, hey, how can I work with you? My listeners are not converting. So inside this episode, I thought I would show you how we create desire and demand for what we offer here on the podcast, and also how we teach our clients to do this inside of their episodes so that you can take this framework and apply it to your show and ultimately get more of your listeners raising their hands going, hey, I want to take the next step to working with you. Can I book a call? Can I get into your program? Do you have a workshop coming up? Or whatever that next step is that you want them to take. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. So I have spent over 500 hours studying what separates successful podcasts from the ones that fail. And in the course of those 500 hours of study, I have also helped over 60 business owners launch a top 100 podcast that can turn their listeners into clients every single month. And in doing this, I started to notice a few things, a few mistakes that hosts make, thinking that it's adding value to their listener, but ultimately undermining their ability to convert listeners to leads and clients. So the first is this. Many hosts think they're adding value through teaching content. We often see this show up in the form of how-to content, where you're teaching someone how to do something. And we tend to think, wow, that's going to be super effective because I'm going to teach this thing and it's going to help this person solve this problem. But ultimately, that is not the most effective way to engage your listener. And it's undermining your ability to convert listeners to leads. Because what this does when you teach someone how to do something, it A, makes your listeners feel equipped, like they've got what they need, so they don't need your program. Or B, it makes your listeners feel overwhelmed. They're already running around like chickens with their heads cut off with 48 things on their to-do list, and now you've just given them a list of 7 more things they need to do. And so they're thinking, okay, your program might be great, but not for me right now. So that's number one. Number two is that hosts tend to speak to their solution or the benefits of what that listener will get or have once they have the solution versus focusing on the problem that they solve. Now, at the end of the day, you know as well as I do that we do not buy things based on logic. We just don't. We buy it emotionally. We buy it because we want it, because we think we need it. Yes, we're being sold to, we're being marketed to, but the most effective marketers know that if they can get you to feel something, you're going to be more likely to purchase whatever it is that they're asking you to purchase. Now, which feeling is a more powerful driver of action? Happiness, joy, excitement, or fear, pain, uncomfortability? We all know how powerful of a motivator fear is. All of us have had experiences at one point or another of having a problem that we are actively looking for help to solve. The problem is when you're in the problem, you can't see what the solution is, much less how it's going to benefit you. So speaking about the solution you provide or the benefits that will happen or that will come when the problem is solved is not as effective as speaking to the problem that your listener has. Now, I will say this is very important. I am not saying to exploit the problems that your listener has. I'm saying to relate to them in the problem they're experiencing, to show them that you understand it, that you understand them and what they're going through so uniquely, so specifically. Because when you can show them that, guess what? You're going to earn their trust. Kind of like if you were to go to the doctor and one doctor was just to say, oh, you're having headaches, here's a prescription. Fill this, you'll feel better by the end of the day. But the other doctor were to sit down with you and really ask you questions like, well, when did these symptoms start? Well, tell me, how long has this been happening? How painful is this problem for you? Is it debilitating? Like, is it interfering with your everyday life? Oh, and you notice that you wake up with these headaches in the morning specifically? And this happened just a few weeks ago? Did anything else happen a few weeks ago that maybe could be related to these headaches? Oh, you got braces a few weeks ago. Okay, well, guess what? What you're having is TMJ problems. This is your jaw being too tight, clenching down at night. It's causing these headaches, right? And they start telling you what the problem is before you've even volunteered any of that information. They've asked you a few questions. and you feel heard. You feel understood. You don't feel silly for having the problem. You feel validated. And this builds trust. And we all know that the doctors with a great bedside manner like that, who really focus on you and relate to you in the problem that you're experiencing, are the ones that we tend to trust more, because we also expect them to have the solution if they understand the problem so well. So, number 2 mistake that we see hosts making is speaking too much to the solution. Speaking too much to the benefits and all the great things that will happen when you have this problem solved, versus focusing the attention on the problem and relating to your listener where they are at. And then the third mistake that we see happening a lot is not being specific enough in the problem that they solve. And a couple of episodes back, 2 episodes to be specific, if you did not listen to that episode, go back and listen, because I walk you through why this is so important and give you the first steps to getting clearer on the problem that you solve, and to be able to communicate it in a way that's unlike anyone else in your niche who's teaching the same thing. But when these problems are occurring, when these hosts are trying to create desire and demand for what they offer through teaching how-to content, through speaking to the solution or the benefits, or through not being specific enough in the problem that they solve, the result of all of this is that listeners don't convert to leads, if they even listen in the first place. The good news is, like everything we talk about here on the podcast, it's fixable. It's totally fixable. And a great starting point with this is to simply look at, how are you structuring your episodes right now? What is the content that you're teaching in your episodes? And this expert content that you're teaching, how are you framing that for your listener inside the episode so that they can get value from it, but so that you're not giving away the farm in the episode to where they feel like, well, I don't need your program after the fact. And look, when I started my podcast, I did not have this totally dialed in. I had some of it, but not all. But the good news is that this can be applied to existing podcasts too. And it's not going to be disruptive to your listeners to tweak this episode structure a little bit. In fact, it'll be the opposite. They're going to enjoy it. They're going to be more engaged. But before I can give you the framework, I will say that this framework is going to work optimally and be the most effective when you have a solid messaging foundation dialed in for your podcast. Because with that, you'll be able to create more powerful educational content with this framework that will move your listeners to action. And this is something we work with extensively on with our clients inside of Pod Launch, because understanding your listener psychology and creating binge-worthy messaging is the first pillar of a profitable podcast. And it's the first step of our 4-phase methodology for that reason. Now, if you feel like you are needing help or guidance to dial in your messaging for your business as a whole, not just for your podcast, but across the board for your entire business, my own mentor, Brandon Lucero, is a great person to go and follow. I'm going to link his show in the show notes for you. But that said, if you have a podcast right now that is stuck at under 1,000 downloads, or you want to launch a podcast and you want to avoid these mistakes, then listen carefully to my voice right now, because I'm going to walk you through exactly how we teach our students to structure their episodes. And once you hear this structure, you're going to see it in action on my podcast. In fact, you're going to see it in action inside the very episode you're listening to right now. So there are 8 distinct segments inside of every podcast episode I create. Now, these 8 segments all connect together into one larger episode. So if you didn't know that these 8 segments were there, you wouldn't hear them. But they work together to create movement in the episode that engages listeners and keeps them listening, and ultimately makes them want to come back for more and makes them want to take the action that I'm asking them to take. So if you're listening to my voice right now, you are experiencing these 8 segments in action. These 8 segments are: number 1, your episode teaser. Number 2, your intro track. Number 3, something I call a personal segue. Number 4, your body content or your guest interview. Number 5, your call to engage. Number 6, your call to action. Number 7, your upcoming episode teaser. And number 8, your signature sign off. Now, don't worry, we're going to dive into each one of these. But if you need to pause this or go back and jot these down, then do that now. Of course, unless you're driving or something. Don't do it if you're driving. But let's start with the episode teaser. This is segment number 1. So this is where at the beginning of the episode, I'm like, here's what we're talking about inside of this episode. And here's the problem. And here's why the problem's happening. And here's what we're going to do to solve it. Now, this happens in about 30 to 60 seconds. But the goal is to create curiosity for today's episode, to not just like drop into the middle of a conversation. I do not care for when podcast hosts pick like a segment of their episode to pull out and make that the intro. I have tested that. I have played with that. It's not my personal favorite because it makes you feel like you missed something. It makes you feel like, wait a minute. Did I start this episode late? Am I just arriving to the conversation, right? Like no one likes to arrive late to the party and feel like everybody's been, talking about something and they totally missed out on that. Like you feel left out. You feel like an outsider. I don't want you to feel that way when you listen to my podcast. But what I do want to do is create curiosity for the episode to give you a reason to listen, to give you a compelling reason to keep listening through the end of the episode. Now, the second segment that comes immediately after that is the intro track. The shorter your intro track can be, the better. Usually for our clients, we recommend 30 seconds or less, and we even make people read it out loud. And if it clocks in over 30 seconds, we make them cut it down. Because your intro track sets the tone of your show. It lets listeners know they're in the right place. It's kind of that last little bit of validation or confirmation that a listener gets to know, okay, this episode is going to be valuable for me. This episode is going to be worth my time. But it has to be quick because your existing listeners, what are they going to do? As soon as they start listening to your podcast, they're going to click through it. And that's why we want it to be around 30 seconds. Because if you've got your podcast player set to skip ahead 15 seconds, it's 2 quick skips. If it's 15 seconds or less, easy, 1 quick skip. So it's really easy for your listener to skip over once they've heard it a dozen times and they know they're in the right place. So shortly after that, we move into our body content. But the way that we move into it is something I call a personal segue. And what this does, it's a minute or two. But it's where you tell a brief anecdote or a personal story that's related to the topic at hand. And what it does is allows you to create connection with your listeners, which is really important for keeping them engaged and building that trust. And from there, you can move into your body content. Now, we have multiple body content frameworks that we teach our clients to help them structure the content within their episode or to structure the interview to get the best content out of their guest. There's a few different ways you can do this, and we don't have time in this episode to dive into all of them. But your body content is the meat of your episode. This is where you're given that value, but it's where you should not teach how-to content. Instead, you want to focus on what they need to do and why they need to do it. And if they want the how and they want how to do it, well, that's what they need to take action for. That's when they need to pay you. That's when they need to book that call or come to your workshop or take whatever the next step is to getting on your email list or into your programs through your call to action. So once you've wrapped up your body content, the next 4 segments move very quickly. They take a matter of maybe 2 minutes toward the end of the episode. So the first is your call to engage. And you've heard me say this. This is where I'm like, by the way, if you have an idea that you would love to hear on the podcast, come DM me on Instagram. My handle is @theCourtneyElmer. Reach out to me. Don't be surprised if I voice message you back. I love hearing from listeners like you, right? It's just a quick call to engage. It's inviting your listener to connect with you or your guest off of the podcast platform, whether that be on social media or wherever that might be. WhatsApp, Voxer, wherever, it doesn't matter. But you're inviting your listener to connect with you. This helps to build connection with your listeners, for those who take that action, to be able to connect with you on other platforms and to have a more personal relationship with you. Now, another thing that you could test in this call to engage section is inviting your listener to leave a review. And I don't do that for every episode, but you've probably heard me say that here before. When we wrap up the body content, I might say something like, and if this episode was super valuable for you today, then I would love it if you would scroll down and if you would leave me a review and let me know if this was helpful for you. Let me know your biggest takeaway. So that's the call to engage. Now, the call to action is where you actually invite your listener to take some sort of action that you want them to take. This could be asking them to share the episode with a friend or to their social media and tagging you. This could be downloading a lead magnet or booking a call or signing up for your workshop. Doesn't matter what you share here, but what does matter is that the link you share is evergreen. That it's not something that's time sensitive or something that's going to expire. Because think about it, if a listener is going back 10 episodes, 12 episodes, 1 month, 2 months worth of content or more, and they're listening to that call to action, well, you might have done a really good job of creating desire and demand in your episode. Now they want to take that action, but they won't be able to because they'll click through to a broken link. And that's just not good for your listener experience. So call to action, make sure it's an evergreen link. If it's not an evergreen link, and if it's something that's time sensitive, then what you're going to want to use for that is dynamic content. And in this episode, we don't have time to dive into all the nitty gritty pros and cons of dynamic content. But if you've had your podcast for any length of time, this is probably something you've experimented with. And if you're listening right now, and you don't have a podcast yet, and you're like, dynamic content, what the heck is that? What it is it's a separate audio clip that you can tack on to the beginning, the middle, or the end of any or all of your podcast episodes, but that can be removed just as easily later when that promotion has ended or expired. So it keeps your episodes really fresh and really relevant. So call to engage, call to action, upcoming episode teaser. And you're going to hear me say this in just a few seconds where I'm like, and in the next episode, we're going to be talking about problem, and how we're going to fix it. And what this does is it creates curiosity for the next episode. And it gives your listener a reason to come back. This is really, really powerful. Now, this does take a little pre-planning. You're going to have to know what you're talking about in the next episode, even if you don't have it all mapped out or outlined yet, but at least know what the topic is going to be so that you can tease it to your listener. And then last but not least, a signature sign-off can be really effective for helping listeners remember you and remember what you're here to help them do. So what this is it's a signature phrase that creates continuity through your episodes, and it lets your listener know they've reached the end of that episode. And I might say something like, and in the next episode, we're talking about blah, 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 tease, to help you make your business binge-worthy. And then you know, okay, the episode's done, moving on. And it's reminding you of what we're here to do. To help you make your business binge-worthy using your podcast to do just that. And there's a lot more that I could teach you and that we do teach inside of Pod Launch for how to use each of these sections super effectively. And this is why, again, having the right messaging foundation is going to make it easier to know exactly how to structure that body content and when to use dynamic content versus what calls to actions to put in your episode or what to say in your teaser, what to say in your upcoming episode teaser. But if you were just to walk away today and implement just 2 parts of this framework, just the intro teaser and the upcoming episode teaser, over time, you will likely see an uptick in listens because you're going to be training your listeners to stay engaged and to come back for more. So this framework is just one of over 37 frameworks like this that we teach inside of Pod Launch. And we teach our clients these frameworks so that your podcast has continuity, it has that structure, it has that backbone, and that it makes it easy for you to plan and map out your content. But that even more importantly, it makes you shine as the expert. And it helps you effectively create desire and demand for whatever it is that you teach and whatever it is that you offer to ultimately help you increase conversions from listeners to leads. So what I would love for you to do is if you go out and test this, just test one piece of this. I don't care which one. Test the intro teaser, test the upcoming episode teaser, test something. And then I want you to DM me on Instagram at the Courtney Elmer and let me know how it goes for you. Let me know if you run into any roadblocks that I can help you with. Let me know if you get any feedback from your listeners, good, bad, or otherwise, because bad feedback is good feedback. You know why? Because it helps you improve as a host. So if you happen to get bad feedback when you implement, I don't think you will, but if you do, on the off chance that you do, DM me that too, so I can help you work through it. And then in the next episode, we're going to be answering a question that I've been asked a lot recently over on Instagram, which, by the way, if you're not following me there, again, at the Courtney Elmer, come hang out with me. But the question is this: should you edit your own podcast? This is a big point of contention for a lot of people. And there's a lot of opinions on this topic, and they don't always agree. So I've got a special guest and time optimization expert joining me in the next episode to help you answer this question for your show based on your level in business, the size of your team, the goals you have for your business, and the goals that you have for your podcast. So don't go anywhere because all of that's coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.